So welcome and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Water Connections webinar. I am your host, Richard Restuccia, and today we're going to be talking about something that really impacts all of us every day, and that is center pivot irrigation. And the way it impacts us is center pivot's used for growing a lot of our food or a lot of our fuel or other things that we use on a day-to-day basis in our lives. As we know, agriculture uses a lot of water. We want to be efficient about that water use. It's a place where we can probably make some gains in conservation sustainability. And joining us today to talk about that is Greg Stewart. Now, Greg, I really only met about 5 or 6 months ago, but I've learned a lot about him in that time period. Greg's a electrical engineer out of BYU. Right after graduating college, he went to work in the irrigation field in agriculture. So he's got some really great hands-on experience with irrigation and, more importantly, technology in irrigation, really creating some of these fabulous tools that people are using every day. But I got to tell you, the thing I liked best about Greg when I first met him is he's really got a can-do attitude. And I would ask him questions, and he wouldn't just give me the answer. He might say the answer or lead into the answer, and then he would go to, but let me show you. And I thought that was really great. I'm a visual learner. I know many people are. And more importantly, people can just say answers, but when they're actually showing you, the proof of this is how I do it, it was really enlightening. And I said, Greg, I've got to get you on a webinar. You're really good at this training and teaching. And he agreed. So, Greg, thank you for joining us today, and welcome.
Absolutely. Glad to be here. Very nice. Thank you.
So, Greg, what a fabulous photo you have here of center pivot. And, that really, the first question that I wanted to ask today is really, what is center pivot irrigation? What is this device?
Yeah, that's a great question. Back growing up, I used to fly over the United States and I would look down and I would see these big circles on the ground and I didn't even know what they were. And as I got into my engineering degree at BYU, I was able to room with a farmer, and he took me down to the farm and he showed me what these amazing machines are. And so when you're looking down from an airplane and you see those circles on the ground, I've got a slide here that kind of shows what that is. That is a center pivot. So these are large wheeled irrigation machines or systems, and they turn around a center point. That's why we call them a center pivot. They're typically a quarter mile long, they're 12 to 1,300 feet, and they can irrigate up to 130 acres for a typical one, but they can get much larger than that and they can be much smaller. But a typical irrigation system for a pivot is going to be 130 acres. And some are pumping up to 1,000 gallons a minute, and they take a full 3 days to make a full rotation. And like you said, Richard, a lot of our crops in the US are grown and worldwide under a center pivot, just because they are efficient machines in delivering water to the ground.
Yeah, so a couple things here, and I do want to mention to everybody watching, I do have the Q&A open, so if you've got some questions for Greg, type them in there, and I will get those questions to him when appropriate. But one of the first questions I have is, now this is interesting, 130 acres. I don't really know very many commercial farms that are just 130 acres. So, typically, what do you see out there as far as number of center pivots somebody might own? Because it'd be more than one.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I also kind of came into this industry thinking that, it's the family farm. I can draw a fence around the farm and that's the farm. That's really not how a lot of these farms are. People install a pivot and maybe a couple miles away, they've got another pivot, and then one becomes available and they get another one. And so, we see people, our typical users are kind of the 20 to 40 pivots, but we definitely have way north of that. I think our largest grower is 90 plus pivots, and so they can go in any size of farm, but yes, kind of 20 to 40 would be a typical farm.
Yeah, that's interesting. The growers I know as well, I mean, they just like to grow. And if they can find land to grow on, doesn't necessarily have to attach to their property. They're going to go grow, especially if they can sell it before they grow it.
Yes,
So
absolutely. Yeah.
interesting. So so as I look at the picture you had on the photo on the slide before, or the one behind you, it's the same one.
Hmm.
I see those sprinklers up in the air pretty high. This doesn't look like maybe the most efficient way to water using center pivots. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something that I'd wondered in the beginning as well, because you drive across the freeway and you look across and it looks like a pretty big spray at the end of the machine and almost nothing at the middle. And obviously that's because we're delivering far more water to the last 20% of the machine than we are to the middle of the machine. And we've seen a lot of advancements in delivering the water from the actual nozzle to the ground over the years. Typical pivot, we would say, is 70% efficient at getting the water from the nozzle to the ground. I was with a farmer a few years ago. He was testing out some new nozzles, and the actual droplets coming out of the nozzle were larger. And we looked at the ground and we said, the ground is just wetter than it is with our old spray nozzles. And so we see advancements taking place in the nozzles as well, throughout the years to make these machines even more efficient. There's also other delivery methods where we increase the number of drops coming from the machine and then put a very low pressure nozzle at the bottom. Sometimes those nozzles can even go beneath the canopy. And so we see that the efficiency of the machine is also improving over the years as we try to combat wind and high ET values.
Yeah, interesting. And then you have another point here that 1,000 gallons per minute. I know my friend Monty Teeter, Dragonline, who's using drip lines to drag behind the center pivots, increasing the efficiency of the application tremendously for people using that system. I think the other thing that he does well is he brings us down to closer to maybe 500 gallons per minute needed, so that people who can't pump the 1,000 can now, be back in the farming business.
Yeah, I think that's one of the really unique things about a center pivot. We can put impact heads on the top of the machine to spray from there. We can do drops down, that 4 to 5 feet off the ground. We can do a 3 feet off the ground with a low pressure nozzle, or we can drag drip lines. And so there's just a lot of things that you can do with the center pivot in terms of your irrigation.
Yeah, very cool. So I'm thinking now I'm a grower. I've got 10, 50, 90 center pivots for your one customer. And look, I've got a rainstorm coming. I want to use some of that free, pure water that's coming out of the clouds. What do I do then? Do I get my guys, jump in a truck and start driving around to the center pivots and turning them off?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a decision point that a lot of our farmers have to make around the world is this storm going to be worth it for me to stop all of my pivots? As a pivot does take 3 days to make a full turn. So I'm not just thinking about watering what's right in front of me. I've also got to be thinking, what am I going to be able to do in 3.5 days from now? So is the water from this rain going to be enough to tide me over until a pivot can make a full turn back to that location? So I think really what we need to do is think about what a typical day in a pivot farmer's life is. So here's a farm that we've got down in southern Utah that we've worked with a lot, and this grower has 80 to 90 pivots. The first thing that the grower does when they get up, they're going to drive to all of those pivots and they're just going to make sure that the pivots are running, see if anything stopped it during the night, and fix anything that's gone wrong. They may make adjustments to chemigation, inspect nitrogen tanks to see if they need to be refilled or if there are any leaks, and then they're going to go about their day. And at the end of the day, what are they going to do again? They're going to drive to all of those pivots just to make sure that those pivots are running. And I bring this up because for this farmer down there, if they were to start at their shop and drive to the center of every single pivot, which is how you would have to turn off the pivot during a rain event, it would take 126 miles round trip to do that. That's a big number. They've got different farm managers to manage different areas, but at the end of the day, it's still 126 miles round trip that they're going. So it's a big decision for this farmer when he says, here's a rainstorm. Am I going to spend 126 miles on equipment to go shut everything down? Or am I just going to let it keep irrigating?
Yeah, that's really interesting, Greg. I don't think many of us have thought about it that way. You might have 100 or so people today who are actually interested in the day and the life of a pivot farmer. I love that title. Um, and yeah, I can't even comprehend, right? Even if you broke it up between 4 or 5 water managers, they're still driving a lot, and the expense incurred for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's wear and tear on the vehicles, it's money in the labor, and then there's also a pumping cost and a water usage. So we estimated that from the time the farmer calls and says, let's shut it all down, to the time all of those machines get shut down, it'll be about 2 hours, and we'll have pumped 8 million gallons of water in that amount of time. Still probably beneficial use, but it's water that wouldn't have been pumped otherwise, and now we've got additional electrical costs. And so it's a big change when we want to do something like that.
Yeah, so I'm thinking, right, this 126-mile round trip isn't at 70 miles an hour on a freeway either. It's going to take me several hours to go, maybe half a day to do that. Is there an alternative?
Yeah, absolutely. So we observed this and a lot of other things in terms of center pivots and how they operate, and we found some really good solutions. And so we've developed a center pivot irrigation controller, which we call our Ag CPC, Ag Center Pivot Controller. And what this does is it sits at the center of the machine and then controls. I'll give you a little bit of demonstration, or I'll show you exactly how we set one of these up. And we do it in a unique way to some of our competitors. So we have our B-hyve Ag Cloud, of course, which exists in the cloud on our servers. And we put a base station at the grower's shop or at their home where they've got internet access already. And then we connect our base station to that, and then that's how we get to the cloud. Then we place one of our center pivot controllers at the center of the machine. And this gives us control over speed and over the pump and over fumigation equipment. And then we connect that via radio back to the base station. And then at the end of the machine, we have an accessory which contains GPS. So now we know exactly where that pivot is, and we're highly accurate with that as well. And we also have in gun. So we can turn on a sprinkler that goes into the corners a little bit to irrigate a little bit of the corners that are often missed. But what else is really unique about our product is we've now brought internet all the way to the center pivot controller. But we didn't want to just stop there. We now rebroadcast that Wi-Fi out to the center pivot itself. And so now our growers can connect things like cameras to this. So if you've got a nitrogen tank and you need to, typically we check that a couple times a day to check level, to check if you've got any leaks. People are putting cameras on those, and now they can do that from the comfort of their home. And they're avoiding that additional trip out to go check on that. If you've got spotty cell coverage, you can now connect to this center pivot controller and you're back online. You can control your pivots. You can do whatever you want, or you can even add weather stations and get that data back to your phone.
Yeah, that's really helpful, Greg, because I'm sitting here thinking I even have a hard time getting my internet to my family room on the other side of the house. How do I get it out to my big farm without a big expense? This seems like a great way to do it.
Yeah, it really is. We spent a lot of time developing what we call the onboarding process, which is getting all of these things configured and connected together. And we've had a really good success with that. And in terms of getting everything connected for what we're doing for a fairly complex, actually a very complex IP network, it's a few presses of the button in the app.
Yeah. Yeah, interesting. So then you're saying, you can use it for other things than just connecting and turning on water, things like general maintenance.
Yeah, absolutely. So if there are other internet devices that you need out at your farm, we can support you in doing that. We've also seen people take this network and then put it at other shops where they before did not have internet and there was no way to get a line there. Now they do, and so they're able to make their entire farm smart. We wanted to make the whole farm smart, not just the center pivots.
Yeah. That's really great, right? Because we know, especially in rural areas, sometimes the different providers don't want to put anything fast as far as speeds or things like this. This is a great way to expand this network on a one-on-one basis.
Yeah.
So how about things like application rates, or what can I do with this software to really help me in growing and increase the maybe my yields?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So that's where we really get into the meat of the app. So let's go to this next slide here. And so this is just a quick screenshot of the app where we're actually controlling the actual center pivot controller. You can see at the top, I can put it in forward, I can put it in reverse, or I can stop the machine. And that second card there labeled speed, I can set the speed up. So this is where I'm going to input my application rate. So if I'm maybe looking at my ET data for the week and deciding how much water I want to put down, still remembering that I'm going to be 3.5 days on a typical rotation, I can come here and you can see I'm going to put 0.75, 3/4 of an inch of water down here, and that's going to automatically calculate my speed, and those could go back and forth. It shows me how quickly that rotation is going to be done so that I can be thinking about, is this going to be fast enough or do I need to slow it down? And then of course I can control my pump. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about what the grower needed to do with this. And so now when we go back to your first question about shutting down, that decision for the grower, when I have a rain event or very commonly a frost event in spring or in fall, we'll see maybe 15 times where we need to shut everything down for both of those seasons. It goes from 126 miles, 12 man hours, 8 million gallons of water decision to a couple of presses on the app. It's a number of seconds. It's less than 1 minute to now shut everything down in the morning, turn everything back on. We talked with one grower recently, and he said, I bought your system because I knew I would increase my yields. And so he said just the yield improvement would pay for itself, because he was better able to manage what was hitting the ground. I got one more slide here about the app itself too. Is we tried to keep it really clean. We spent a lot of time talking to growers. We watched them use our app. We watched them use our competitors' app, and we iterated several times. I grew up in a city of 250,000 people, not on a farm. And the advantage that gave me was I didn't know what they needed. And so the only thing that I could do was listen to what they said. And, I could probably tell you 10 things that are on these screens that from different farmers who have said, hey, I needed to do this and this and this. And what we did, as we incorporated those things, we made a really easy to use, really intuitive app. And we often get praise on the app. And so we're really proud of it. We've gone kind of with a stoplight mentality. Green, everything's good. Red, here's a fault. I need to go check that pivot first thing in the morning. But in even more than just what it looks like is getting a notification. So if I get a low pressure event on a pivot at 8 o'clock at night, before I checked my pivot at 7:45, the pivot went off at 8, and I've missed all of my irrigation at night. Now I can get that notification, and I can be a much more efficient and effective irrigator.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Also, because I guess you don't have to be right there to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. The experience is as if you were there. So our app is, and our whole system, because of the way it's connected over Wi-Fi, is actually very, very fast. We try to keep our round trip time from the time you press the button to the time the pivot actually begins moving to 20 milliseconds. So we're much, much less than a second. So it feels like you're there. We had one grower who was adjusting a valve, and he was watching the pressure on the app change in real time. And he said, there's just no way I would have been able to do this with some of the previous devices he had used in the past, and just made him that much more effective in his job.
Okay, well, we've got a slew of questions, Greg, coming in from our audience. I want to take a few of those right now. The first is from one of my favorite viewers from down in Chile. He very, very loyal viewer. And the first question he's asking is, what about fertigation automation? Can I make adjustments? Can I set this up using this app as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we have it built into our system. You can see right there on that middle slide, an auxiliary. So this is allowing us to turn chemigation on and then turn chemigation off. So a farmer in a windy environment is going to want to put chemical on the ground in the least amount of wind. And that's typically at night. So we'll see growers, they're going to run their irrigation system as normal at 8 o'clock at night. They flip on the chemigator. They've got it set up earlier in the day. They flip on the chemigator, set the speed to 100%, do a full pass, and then stop. And so before, what they were doing was driving out in the middle of the night to turn that chemigator on, and now they can just do it from their phone.
Yeah, and I imagine they're getting lower power rates for the electric motors too on these in the evenings as well.
Yes, absolutely. We see a lot of electric companies that offer incentives to go and operate the pivots in off-peak hours.
Is there any interface today between like a soil moisture probe or any ET data? This is also coming in from one of our viewers.
Yes, that's a great question. We've spent a lot of time looking at weather probes or weather stations and into moisture probes. And we don't have a direct connection today, but it is an opportunity that we are actively exploring and will incorporate at some point.
Yeah, and certainly between some of the other products we have, getting this information is not hard, right?
That's right, exactly. We on our smart landscape side, we have all of that data being crunched every day.
Yeah. Oh, great. So then we had somebody else asking about continuing education units for watching these, and yeah, I'll reach out to you and let you know how you can take advantage of getting some CEUs for the Irrigation Association as a result of watching our webinars. So somebody else is asking, Greg, are you scheduling irrigation based on ET? What are your thresholds for triggering irrigation?
Yeah, excellent question. We want to keep the control of the irrigation in the hands of the farmers. We've at times in the past presented the ET to the grower, but we keep that there with them. And this is also helpful to the agronomist, because the agronomist who maybe is just making those decisions on the irrigation can go back and look at historical logs, and they can make those decisions. But we keep the control in the hands of the grower.
Yeah. Okay, great. The other thing I'm thinking about is that don't all center pivots come with a device like this on them already?
Yeah, that's a great question. Most of the new controllers that are being sold by the main manufacturers include a type of remote application, but really you're paying for that. So we have a few of our dealers who, when they install a new machine, instead of buying the latest and greatest pivot panel, they buy the most simple panel, and then they add B-hyve to it. And they often come out ahead as if they had gone with another service or with the manufacturer's included remote control for it. One other thing that's unique about our system is we are not requiring any type of ongoing subscription to use our software. We are very unique in that you buy the hardware, you connect it to your network, and now you can use it without any ongoing maintenance fee or subscription.
Yeah. Interesting. That's great news. So then the other thing I wanted to mention too, or ask is, like you said, I've flown across the country too, seeing all those center pivots. There's got to be some old ones that don't have technology on them.
Yeah, and that's really where B-hyve makes a big difference. We can go on to any standard electrical pivot, so from any of the main manufacturers, and we can take an old 40-year-old machine. And I remember one of the farmers I started with, he took me out to the oldest machine I'd ever seen, and he said, if you can make this work, you can make anything work. And that's where we started, because we wanted to start with the old machine that really had forward, reverse, stop, and a speed adjustment, and make it do all of these things. And so, yes, so we can go on the newest machine that's just been released, or the oldest machine out there.
Yeah, and personally, I got to tell you, that is what I like best about this, because I'm looking at a quarter mile of engineering that is quite impressive. And the fact that we can just keep that going longer from a sustainability conservation standpoint, that is really key.
Absolutely.
So when I think about all this, I think, and I worry, man, this might be really expensive, right? With no subscription, boy, I'm going to get hit with a really high price tag at the beginning. What's somebody pay for this typically?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And so I won't get into exact numbers on what people are going to pay. And that just really comes down to it depends on the system that's going in. You know, if I'm a grower who has all of my pivots that are close together and my base can be right there, that's going to be a different than if I'm going many, many miles and I need to add repeaters. We saw earlier, we were connecting to the base and then out to, but we can extend that network even more. And so, but what it really comes down to is what is that return on investment? And so it's going to save us immediately in labor. You know, twice a day, we're just putting eyes on the machines. It's going to save us in electrical costs when we want to actually shut down the machine. And it's also going to help us with our yields because when the machine stops, we're going to get notified. I was working with a seed potato grower once, and he told me that there are certain times in the growth life of a potato plant that those plants cannot be starving for water. And so he would get up in the middle of the night and just drive out to the machine, see if it was irrigating, come back home. And then a couple hours later, he would get up in the middle of the night again, go out and check that machine. Because if the plant didn't get the water it needed, it would make lots of tiny potatoes instead of fewer, much larger potatoes. And so farmers are telling us, yeah, we're doing this to save on time and on labor, but also to help our yields.
Yeah, and to help their own health, right? That's
Yeah,
going to be very stressful getting up
yeah,
multiple times
absolutely.
in the night to do that. Wow.
Yeah, it's one of the unique things about this product is it is literally changing people's lives. It's changing how they're working. They're able to work more on the important things during the day instead of going and just driving and checking pivots. They're able to sleep at night because they're going to get notified if there's a problem instead of getting up and then going out and checking machines.
Yeah, certainly improving the quality of life with technology. Now, so we have another question about is there a way to set alerts for unexpected stops in your pivot? And seems like there is.
Yes, absolutely. We have a whole slew of notifications. So if your pivot safety's out, so it gets out of alignment, you're going to get a notification. You can see right here, not only are we going to tell you that the pivot has stopped, we're also going to tell you which tower got out of alignment. When I talk to people about this feature, they get excited because inevitably someone has had tall corn and they've just sprayed it and the pivot gets out of alignment and they don't know if they need to walk from the center of the machine or from the end of the machine to go fix the problem. But with a notification like this, we're going to let you know which tower is out of alignment so you can get out there and get that fixed. Low pressure, high pressure, power shutdowns, anything like that, we're going to let you get notified.
Wow. And all to an app on my phone. I mean, right to my pocket.
Yes, exactly. Android, iOS, we do updates often, trying to make sure that we're providing the best service for our growers.
So we've got another question coming in, Greg, and this person's asking, why does it matter that you can reverse the direction of the pivot?
Yeah, fantastic question. So when you have a typical pivot is, of course, circular, but you also have some pivots that are part circles, which are going from maybe 90 degrees to 270 degrees because they're against the road. So they're going to hit barriers and then go back and forth. But you're also, if you're harvesting the crop, you're going to usually put the pivot in one position, maybe on the road, and you're going to go around that pivot and you're going to harvest everything, but then you've got to scoot it backwards so that you can harvest the crop that's under the pivot itself. So you definitely need to be able to go in forward and reverse for those situations.
Yeah, interesting. So then is there a long time period from when I hit the button and it actually reverses or starts in the direction? Do I have to figure on 10 minutes, half hour? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. The reaction time is basically immediate. So that's the 20 millisecond number we were talking about. And this was something that when we started developing the center pivot irrigation app and the server and the backend and the firmware and everything, we were already very successful in our landscape B-hyve timers, which is a home smart device. People expect that when you push the button on your app to turn on a light, the light turns on just like that. They expect the same thing from an irrigation controller. So we started with that model and we put it in, and it's been very successful because it is very fast for the pivot to respond and begin moving.
Yeah, that's amazing, right? I used to remember when I would turn on my landscape, or when I do turn on my landscape irrigation with my phone, right? Somebody will always come over and go, "Wow, how'd you do that?" Imagine moving something as big as a pivot.
Yeah,
I,
we
sure,
had
I'd get a lot of questions.
we had a pretty good story from a grower once. He said that his neighbor called and he said, "Hey, your end gun's turned on and it's watering the road." And as he was talking to him, he pulled out his phone and he turned off the end gun and he said, "Oh, it's about to turn off." And he said, "Oh, it just did. You were right, you know." And so little did he know that the farmer was actually making that adjustment just that fast in the app.
Yeah, that's a great story, Greg. And man, you have been full of good information today and have made center pivot irrigation very interesting. So thank you for that. For those watching today that are still not sure, if they want to take on this technology, worried that it might be too complicated, or, they just might not be able to get it. What do you have to say to those people?
Yeah, I think you should definitely take a look at it. Talk to one of our dealers, talk to some of our salesmen, and we can show you some, how you're going to be able to just be a better user of water. That's really important to us here at Hydrain and Husqvarna is being really good stewards of water. And there's lots of our growers who have just shown that it makes sense to move forward with something like this. But yeah, I think definitely start the conversation, and we can help answer questions and help you understand the system more as a whole.
Yeah. Greg, what an interesting and great guest you've been today. I really want to thank you for enlightening us on this subject. It's been just great. People can email me if you have additional questions, and I'll put you directly in touch with Greg if you have some more. And, he's open to that. So I encourage you to take advantage of really talking with one of the leading experts in the field about center pivot control. I also want to take a moment to thank all of you for watching today. I'm really motivated to do my work when I know there's so many people so interested in irrigation efficiency, as well as conservation and sustainability. Remember, you can go on the Hydrain website today and see all of our past webinars. You can also go to wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts, and we extract the audio out of these and put it on places like Spotify. So I always love to think that people are out there working and educating at the same time. Really gets me excited about irrigation and conservation. We're going to be back in 2 weeks. I'm going to have Stewart CEO of Orbit, talking about how much good maintenance in your landscape positively affects conservation and sustainability in your yard. So it should be very interesting. So I'll look for that in a couple of weeks. And again, Greg, thanks very much. I really appreciate your time and information today.
Yes, thank you very much, Richard.
Okay. Well, thanks, everybody. And we will talk to you guys in a couple of weeks. Thank you.